A bride can survive a broken promise, but surviving the laughter that follows is something else entirely. Olivia Hart stood at the end of the flower-lined aisle, her trembling fingers wrapped around a bouquet of white roses as the grand ceremony hall glowed beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers. The scent of fresh pine garlands and candle wax filled the air, mixing with the nervous flutter in her chest. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that this day would change everything. At 22 years old, Olivia had spent most of her life learning how to stay unnoticed. As an Omega, she had never been the loudest voice in the room or the center of attention. She preferred quiet corners, soft smiles, and peaceful mornings. While others fought for status and recognition, Olivia spent her days helping wherever she could, offering kindness even when few returned it. Today was supposed to be different. Today she was supposed to become a wife. Today she was supposed to belong somewhere. The guests filling the enormous hall seemed almost unreal beneath the warm golden lights. Wealthy families from across the territory sat in polished rows. Elegant gowns shimmered. Expensive suits reflected the glow from the chandeliers overhead. Excited whispers floated through the room as musicians played a gentle melody from the balcony. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked exactly the way a wedding should. Yet something felt wrong. Olivia swallowed hard and glanced toward the massive wooden doors at the far end of the hall. Her groom was late. At first, nobody seemed concerned. A few guests exchanged amused smiles. Someone joked that cold feet were normal. Another guest laughed and said the groom was probably rehearsing his vows one last time. Olivia tried to smile with them. She tried to ignore the growing knot tightening inside her stomach. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The musicians exchanged uncertain glances. Conversations grew louder. Heads began turning toward the entrance. The officiant checked his watch twice. Olivia's father shifted uncomfortably beside the front row. Her pulse quickened. The bouquet suddenly felt heavier in her hands. The room that had seemed so warm now felt far too large. Far too quiet. Every second stretched longer than the last. She searched the crowd, hoping to find reassurance in familiar faces. Instead, she found uncertainty. Curious eyes. Speculation. Pity. Her throat tightened. The knot in her chest became impossible to ignore. Then the doors opened. A wave of relief rushed through her so quickly that her knees nearly weakened. Guests turned toward the entrance. Conversation stopped. The musicians lowered their instruments. Olivia lifted her head. Finally. He was here. But as the figure stepped through the doorway, something inside her whispered that this was not the ending she had imagined. Because the expression on the faces of the arriving guests was not relief. It was surprise. And as the murmurs began spreading through the hall like ripples across still water, Olivia suddenly realized she was no longer standing at the beginning of a dream. She was standing at the edge of something she could not yet understand. The whispers spread faster than wildfire through dry grass. Olivia could not make out every word, but she did not need to. The expression said enough. Confusion. Curiosity. Anticipation. She tightened her grip on the bouquet as the figures entering through the grand doors moved farther into the hall. At the center of the group was Ethan. Her groom. Relief flickered inside her chest for less than a second before it shattered completely. Ethan was smiling. Not at her. Beside him walked a young woman in an elegant ivory gown that looked far more expensive than Olivia's simple dress. Her golden curls rested perfectly on her shoulders. Her jewelry sparkled beneath the chandelier light. Olivia recognized her instantly. Vanessa Sinclair. Her cousin. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. A strange silence settled over the hall as Ethan escorted Vanessa down the aisle that should have belonged to Olivia. Every step felt unreal. Every heartbeat sounded distant in her ears. Olivia searched Ethan's face, desperately hoping there was some misunderstanding. Some explanation. Some reason that would make sense of what she was seeing. Instead, Ethan stopped several feet away and offered Vanessa his arm with a proud smile. The murmurs grew louder. Olivia noticed guests leaning forward in their seats. Others exchanged knowing looks. Some even appeared entertained. Her stomach tightened. "Ethan," she finally whispered. Her voice barely carried across the room. Ethan glanced toward her as though he had almost forgotten she was there. The casual indifference in his eyes hurt far more than anger ever could. "Olivia," he said. "I suppose this conversation was going to happen eventually." A nervous laugh escaped someone in the crowd. Olivia felt every eye turn toward her. "What is happening?" she asked. Ethan sighed dramatically, as though burdened by an inconvenience. "I made a mistake," he said. "I convinced myself that kindness was enough. That simplicity was enough. But I realized something." He turned toward Vanessa. "A future Luna should inspire confidence. She should strengthen a family. She should stand proudly beside her mate." Vanessa lowered her gaze with a carefully practiced smile. Olivia felt the color drain from her face. The meaning behind his words struck long before he spoke them directly. "I have chosen Vanessa." The hall exploded with whispers. Some guests gasped. Others nodded as though they had expected this all along. Olivia stood frozen. Her fingers trembled around the bouquet. Across the front rows, she saw people avoiding her eyes. A few looked embarrassed for her. Most simply looked fascinated. Ethan continued speaking, each word landing heavier than the last. "This is the right decision for everyone involved." Olivia stared at him. This was the man who had promised her a future. The man who had sworn he respected her heart. Yet now he spoke as though she were a mistake being corrected. Vanessa stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "We never meant to hurt you," she said softly. The sympathy in her voice somehow made everything worse. Olivia swallowed hard. Her throat burned. The musicians remained silent. The officiant stood motionless. No one intervened. No one defended her. The enormous hall suddenly felt smaller than ever before. Then somewhere near the back of the room, a single laugh broke the silence. Another followed. And another. Olivia lowered her eyes as humiliation washed over her like a cold wave. In that moment she realized the wedding she had dreamed about no longer existed. It had become something else entirely. For a few endless seconds, Olivia could not move. The laughter was not loud. That was what made it worse. It came in scattered bursts from different corners of the hall, carried beneath polite smiles and whispered conversations. People were trying to be discreet, but humiliation never needed a large audience to hurt. It only needed enough witnesses. Olivia stood alone at the altar while the ceremony that had been planned for her slowly transformed into something she no longer recognized. Vanessa remained at Ethan's side, elegant and composed beneath the golden lights. Ethan looked relieved, almost proud of himself. The sight left a hollow ache inside Olivia's chest. She searched the faces around her, hoping someone would object. Someone would stand and say this was wrong. Instead, she saw guests nodding quietly. Others whispered behind raised hands. A few looked at her with pity, which somehow felt even worse. Pity suggested the outcome had been inevitable. As though everyone except Olivia had already known how this day would end. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess," he suggested. Ethan shook his head. "There is no need." His voice carried easily through the hall. "The decision has already been made." The words landed like a final door closing. Olivia's father lowered his eyes. Her mother sat frozen in her seat, unable to hide the heartbreak written across her face. Neither spoke. Neither knew what to say. Olivia could hardly blame them. She did not know what to say either. Her future had unraveled in front of hundreds of people within the span of a few minutes. Vanessa stepped closer. "Olivia, I truly hope someday you understand." Olivia stared at her cousin. Understand what? How easily promises could be discarded. How quickly loyalty could vanish when something more appealing appeared. She wanted to ask the questions. She wanted to defend herself. Yet her voice refused to come. Around her, conversations continued to grow. One woman whispered that Ethan had made a practical choice. Another remarked that Vanessa had always seemed better suited for leadership. Someone else commented that an Omega as quiet as Olivia could never thrive in a position of influence. Every sentence felt like another thread being pulled loose from the life she thought she had built. Then Ethan reached for Vanessa's hand. The gesture was simple, harmless, and completely ordinary. Yet it told the entire room that he had already moved on. The crowd accepted it almost immediately. Several guests even began applauding. Olivia's fingers loosened around the bouquet. One white rose slipped free and fell onto the polished floor. She watched it land near her feet. Such a small thing. Yet somehow it felt like watching the last piece of her dream disappear. Her eyes burned. Not from anger. Not even from sadness. From the overwhelming realization that she no longer belonged in this room. The hall felt smaller with every passing second. The air felt heavier. Every glance seemed to follow her. Every whisper seemed directed toward her. Olivia took a slow breath and lowered her gaze. If she stayed another minute, she feared she would completely break apart in front of everyone. And she refused to give them that. Without a word, she gathered the edge of her dress, turned away from the altar, and began walking toward the exit while the celebration behind her slowly continued without her. The massive doors closed behind Olivia with a deep echo that seemed to separate her from the life she had known only minutes before. The noise of the celebration faded into the distance as she stepped into the cool afternoon air. Dark clouds had gathered over the city while she was inside, covering the sun and painting the sky in shades of gray. A cold breeze tugged at the edges of her wedding dress as she descended the stone steps alone. No one followed her. No one called her name. For years Olivia had feared being forgotten, but she had never imagined it would happen so quickly. She walked without direction through the quiet streets surrounding the ceremony hall. The bouquet remained in her hands, though several petals had already loosened and drifted away behind her. Store owners watched from their windows. Passing strangers glanced at the white dress and then quickly looked away. Olivia kept moving. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Not yet. She had spent her entire life enduring disappointment with dignity. She would not lose that now. The first drops of rain began falling a few blocks later. They landed softly against the pavement and darkened the fabric of her sleeves. Within minutes the gentle drizzle became a steady shower. Olivia continued walking. The rain soaked her dark hair and weighed down her dress, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were louder than the storm. Every promise Ethan had made replayed inside her mind. Every conversation. Every smile. Every future they had planned together. She wondered when he had stopped believing in those promises. She wondered if he ever truly had. By the time she reached the edge of the city square, the rain was falling heavily. Water flowed along the cobblestones in thin silver streams. The square was nearly empty as merchants hurried to cover their carts and pedestrians searched for shelter. Olivia stopped beside an old stone fountain at the center of the plaza. Her strength finally began to fade. The weight she had been carrying all afternoon settled heavily across her shoulders. She looked down at the engagement ring still resting on her finger. For a long moment she simply stared at it. Then she slowly removed it and closed her hand around the cold metal. The simple gesture felt far more final than any words spoken at the ceremony. A trembling breath escaped her lips. Perhaps everyone had been right. Perhaps she had never been enough. Not beautiful enough. Not confident enough. Not important enough. The thought hurt because part of her believed it. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Olivia lowered herself onto the edge of the fountain and bowed her head. Rainwater dripped from her hair onto her hands. Around her, the square grew quieter. Yet what Olivia did not notice was a dark luxury vehicle parked beneath the covered entrance of a nearby government building. Standing beside it was a tall man dressed in an immaculate black coat. Even from a distance, his presence carried an unmistakable authority. Several guards remained respectfully behind him, waiting in silence. The man watched the lonely figure sitting beside the fountain. His sharp silver eyes never left her. While the rest of the city saw a humiliated bride sitting alone in the rain, he saw something entirely different. And for the first time that day, fate quietly began to change direction. The rain continued falling across the city square, turning the stone streets into mirrors of gray sky and scattered light. Olivia remained seated beside the fountain, unaware that she was being watched. Her fingers still curled around the ring she had removed only moments earlier. The cold metal pressed against her palm like the final piece of a life that no longer existed. Across the square, the tall man in the black coat stood motionless beneath the covered entrance. His name was Adrian Nightfall. To most of the kingdom, he was a distant figure whose authority reached every corner of the territory. To those who had met him, he was a man whose presence could silence an entire room without a single word. Yet now his attention remained fixed on the young woman sitting alone in the rain. One of his advisors stepped carefully closer. "Your Majesty," the older man said quietly, "the council meeting is scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Adrian did not immediately answer. His silver eyes never left Olivia. "What happened here?" he finally asked. The advisor followed his gaze toward the fountain. "News travels quickly. There was a wedding at the Grand Hall this afternoon. The groom abandoned his intended bride and publicly chose another woman." Adrian's expression remained unreadable. And everyone watched. It was not a question. The advisor hesitated. "Yes, Your Majesty." For a moment, neither man spoke. The rain softened slightly, becoming a gentle curtain drifting across the square. Several pedestrians hurried past with umbrellas, but none approached Olivia. She seemed invisible now that the spectacle was over. Adrian had seen many forms of power during his years on the throne. He had seen people fight desperately to gain it. He had seen others abuse it carelessly. What he respected most was dignity. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, the woman beside the fountain still possessed it. She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had simply walked away carrying her heartbreak in silence. The advisor cleared his throat. "Shall I have transportation prepared, Your Majesty?" Adrian finally looked away from the square. "It is already prepared." His gaze shifted toward the black vehicle waiting nearby. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Bring it closer." The advisor blinked in surprise but immediately nodded. Across the plaza, Olivia slowly rose from the fountain. Her dress was soaked. Her shoes felt heavy with rainwater. She did not know where she was going next. Home no longer felt like home. The future she had planned was gone. For the first time in years, she had no destination. She took a few uncertain steps forward. Then headlights appeared through the rain. A sleek black vehicle rolled smoothly across the square and stopped several feet away from her. Olivia froze. The rear door opened. A uniformed driver stepped out and held an umbrella against the rain. Confused, Olivia glanced around, assuming there must be some mistake. Then a deep voice carried through the quiet afternoon. Calm. Controlled. Impossible to ignore. "Miss Hart." Olivia turned toward the sound. Standing beneath the umbrella was the same tall man she had not noticed before. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. And for the first time since leaving the ceremony hall, Olivia forgot about the rain entirely. Olivia stood motionless as rainwater slid down the edges of her dark hair. For a moment she wondered whether she had imagined the voice. The man before her carried himself with a quiet confidence unlike anyone she had ever met. His black coat was untouched by the weather beneath the umbrella, and his silver eyes remained steady as they met hers. She searched her memory, trying to place his face. There was something familiar about him, something she had seen in newspapers, official portraits, and distant broadcasts. Then realization struck her. Breath caught. Every citizen in the kingdom knew that face. Adrian Nightfall. The Alpha King. Olivia's heart stumbled inside her chest. Instinctively, she took a small step back. Not out of fear, but disbelief. Of all the people who could have appeared in the square today, he was the last person she expected. The driver remained respectfully silent beside the vehicle. Several guards stood farther away, allowing the conversation to remain private. Adrian took a few measured steps forward. Not enough to crowd her. Just enough to make it clear that he was speaking to her and no one else. "You should not be standing in the rain," he said. His voice was calm, carrying none of the arrogance Olivia had expected from a king. She glanced down at her soaked dress and managed a faint smile that quickly disappeared. "I do not think the rain is my biggest problem today." For the briefest moment, something softened in Adrian's expression. Not amusement. Understanding. "No," he replied. "I suppose it is not." The square remained quiet around them. The storm had driven most people indoors, leaving only the distant sound of rainfall against stone and glass. Olivia lowered her gaze. Embarrassment returned as she remembered how she must look. Her wedding dress was soaked. Her makeup had long since vanished. She looked nothing like the confident bride shown in magazines and advertisements. Yet Adrian did not seem bothered by any of it. "Why are you here?" she finally asked. The question escaped before she could stop it. Adrian answered without hesitation. "Because I saw someone sitting alone when she should not have been." Olivia blinked. Such a simple answer should not have affected her. Yet somehow it did. More than the apologies she had heard earlier. More than the pitying looks from strangers. She tightened her grip around the ring still hidden inside her hand. "You do not know me." "No," Adrian said. "But I know what happened." Olivia looked away. The humiliation returned immediately. The whispers. The laughter. The way everyone had watched. "Then you know I made a fool of myself." No, his response came instantly. Firm. Certain. Olivia looked back up. Adrian's silver eyes never wavered. "I know that someone failed to recognize your worth. That is not the same thing." The words settled over her with unexpected weight. Nobody had spoken to her that way all day. Nobody had challenged the story everyone else seemed willing to accept. For the first time since leaving the ceremony hall, Olivia felt the crushing loneliness around her begin to ease. Adrian extended his hand toward her. A simple gesture. Nothing dramatic. Nothing forced. Yet somehow it carried more kindness than she had experienced in hours. Rain continued falling around them as he spoke quietly. "Come with me, Olivia. You should not have to face this day alone." Olivia stared at the hand extended toward her. Rain tapped softly against the umbrella above Adrian while cool drops continued sliding down her sleeves. Everything about the moment felt unreal. Just hours ago she had stood before hundreds of guests believing her future was secure. Then that future had disappeared. Now the Alpha King himself was standing in front of her, offering kindness when she had almost forgotten such a thing existed. For a long moment she did not move. Part of her wanted to refuse. Not because she distrusted him, but because she was exhausted. Emotionally exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that made even simple decisions feel impossible. Adrian seemed to understand. He did not rush her. He did not repeat himself. He simply waited. The patience in that silence slowly eased the tension inside her chest. Finally, Olivia placed her hand in his. His grip was steady and warm despite the cold weather. Not possessive. Not commanding. Reassuring. The moment their hands touched, something unexpected happened. The crushing loneliness she had carried since leaving the ceremony hall felt slightly lighter. Not gone. But lighter. Adrian guided her toward the waiting vehicle. The driver quickly opened the rear door while the guards respectfully turned their attention elsewhere. Olivia hesitated before entering. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. Adrian met her gaze. "Somewhere warm." The answer was simple enough to make her smile despite everything. She slid into the vehicle and settled against the leather seat. Moments later Adrian joined her. The door closed, shutting out the rain and the noise of the city. Warm air filled the cabin. Olivia suddenly became aware of how cold she had been. Her hands trembled slightly as feeling returned to her fingers. A folded blanket appeared beside her. She looked up in surprise. Adrian had handed it to her without a word. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome." The vehicle began moving through the rain-soaked streets. For several minutes neither spoke. Olivia watched droplets race across the windows while buildings passed outside in blurred streaks of light and shadow. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Eventually Adrian spoke. "You remained dignified today." Olivia laughed softly. It was not a happy laugh. "I do not think many people would agree." "Most people confuse dignity with victory," Adrian replied. "They are not the same thing." Olivia looked at him. The city lights reflected faintly in his silver eyes. "Everyone watched me fail." Adrian shook his head. "No. Everyone watched someone else fail you." The words settled deep inside her. She wanted to dismiss them. She wanted to believe he was simply being kind. Yet part of her recognized the truth in what he said. The vehicle turned through a set of private gates and entered a beautifully illuminated estate overlooking the city. Olivia stared through the window. The property was elegant without being overwhelming. Warm lights glowed from large windows. Gardens stretched across the grounds despite the rain. It felt peaceful. Safe. The vehicle stopped beneath a covered entrance. Before stepping out, Adrian turned toward her once more. "Olivia," he said. She looked up. "Today does not define your worth." His voice remained calm, but there was undeniable conviction behind every word. "And it will not define your future either." For the first time since the wedding, Olivia felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The following morning arrived with clear skies and golden sunlight spilling across the estate. For the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia woke without the weight of hundreds of judgmental eyes staring at her. She stood near the tall bedroom window, wrapped in a soft gray sweater that one of the house staff had thoughtfully provided the night before. Beyond the glass, manicured gardens stretched across the property, their flowers glistening from the previous day's rain. Everything felt calm. Almost too calm. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Moments later, a staff member entered carrying a breakfast tray and a folded newspaper. Olivia thanked her quietly before setting the tray aside. Her attention immediately shifted to the newspaper. Across the front page was a photograph from the ceremony hall. Ethan and Vanessa stood together beneath the chandeliers, smiling for the cameras. The headline praised their unexpected union. Olivia stared at it for several seconds. Strangely, the familiar pain did not arrive. Instead, she felt distance. As though she were looking at a story that belonged to someone else. She folded the paper and set it aside. A short time later, she joined Adrian in the estate's sunlit dining room. He sat at the far end of a long table reviewing documents while sunlight reflected across polished wood surfaces. Despite the grandeur around him, he appeared approachable, more focused on his work than his title. When he noticed her entering, he immediately stood. "Good morning, Olivia." She smiled softly. "Good morning." They shared breakfast in comfortable conversation. Nothing forced. Nothing formal. For the first time, Olivia found herself laughing at one of Adrian's surprisingly dry observations about government meetings. The sound startled even her. Adrian noticed. "There it is," he said. Olivia tilted her head. What? The smile you forgot you had. Heat touched her cheeks. She looked away, but she could not stop smiling. Later that afternoon, Adrian invited her to accompany him to a public charity event in the city. Olivia hesitated. The thought of facing crowds again made her stomach tighten. Yet Adrian never pressured her. Only if you wish to go, he said. After a moment, she agreed. When their vehicle arrived downtown, Olivia immediately noticed something unusual. People were gathering along the sidewalks. Many had come hoping to see the Alpha King. As Adrian stepped from the vehicle, cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. Then Olivia exited beside him. A wave of surprised whispers moved through the crowd. Several reporters immediately recognized her. The abandoned bride. The woman everyone had discussed the day before. Olivia felt anxiety begin rising again. Then Adrian calmly stepped beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. The simple gesture changed everything. Cameras captured the moment instantly. Reporters exchanged startled looks. Questions shifted. The narrative that had dominated every headline for 24 hours suddenly began changing. Because standing beside the Alpha King was no longer a forgotten woman left behind at an altar. Standing beside him was someone he had personally chosen to support. And across the city, people were beginning to notice. The photographs from the charity event spread across the kingdom faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, newspapers, websites, and television broadcasts were all showing the same image. Olivia standing beside Adrian Nightfall. Not behind him. Not hidden in the background. Beside him. For many people, it was the first time they had seen her as anything other than the woman left standing alone at a wedding. The shift was subtle at first, but it continued growing. Public opinion changed. Conversations changed. Even the headlines changed. Days passed, and Olivia slowly began rebuilding parts of herself she thought were lost forever. She spent time working with several charitable organizations supported by the Royal Foundation. She visited community centers, listened to families, and helped wherever she could. To her surprise, people responded warmly. They did not see weakness. They saw kindness. They saw sincerity. Most importantly, they saw someone who understood hardship without bitterness. One afternoon, while attending a public event in the city, Olivia noticed familiar faces standing near the crowd barriers. Ethan and Vanessa. For a brief moment, old memories threatened to return. The embarrassment. The heartbreak. The humiliation. Yet as she looked at them, she realized something important. They no longer had power over her future. Ethan seemed uncomfortable. Vanessa avoided her gaze entirely. Neither approached. Neither spoke. And for the first time, Olivia felt no desire for explanations. No desire for apologies. Life had already given her something better than revenge. It had given her peace. Later that evening, she stood with Adrian on a balcony overlooking the city skyline. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon beneath a sky filled with stars. A cool breeze carried the sounds of distant traffic and laughter from the streets below. Olivia rested her hands against the railing and smiled softly. Everything feels different now, she admitted. Adrian glanced toward her. Different can be good. Olivia laughed quietly. A few weeks ago, I thought my life was over. Adrian shook his head. No. A chapter ended. That is not the same thing. She looked up at him. The city lights reflected in his silver eyes just as they had the day they met in the rain. Why did you stop that day? She asked. You could have kept walking. Adrian was silent for several seconds. Because I saw someone who had been treated unfairly. Olivia smiled. That sounds like something a king would say. Perhaps. A faint smile touched his face. The truth is simpler. I saw someone worth stopping for. Warmth spread through Olivia's chest. Not because of the words alone, but because she knew they were genuine. Below them, the city continued moving beneath the night sky. Ahead of them stretched possibilities neither had expected. Olivia looked toward the horizon and felt something she had not felt on her wedding day. Not hope borrowed from another person. Not hope based on promises. Real hope. The kind built from experience, resilience, and self-worth. Somewhere below, people still talked about the abandoned bride who had become the most unexpected story in the kingdom. But Olivia no longer thought of herself that way. She was not the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman who discovered her value when everything else fell apart. And as the lights of the city shimmered beneath the stars, her new beginning finally felt real.